I was standing on the front lawn when the locksmith looked at me and said, "You're the legal owner, ma'am? What would you like me to do with the current occupants?" 5 years ago, I was sleeping 10 feet from that same front door, on a folding cot in the garage. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, like someone else was chosen over you again and again, you'll understand exactly what this story is about. So take a second to like and subscribe if that feeling hits close. Because what happened next? They never saw coming. My name is Emily Carter, and the first time I realized I didn't belong in my own house, it wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight. It was quiet, clean, and final. It started with a room. The house sat on Maple Ridge Drive, a 2-story place with white siding, a narrow driveway, and a garage that always smelled faintly of motor oil and cold metal. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban home. Inside, it ran on a system. After my mom passed, my dad remarried quickly. Rachel Carter came in with soft smiles, measured words, and a daughter named Olivia who seemed to fit into the house like she had always been there. Olivia had light spilling through her windows, soft beige walls, a queen bed with a padded headboard, and framed photos arranged like a magazine spread. I had a room too, at least I did. Mine was smaller, tucked at the end of the hallway, but it was mine. A desk by the window, a twin bed, a closet that barely closed. I kept it clean. I stayed quiet. I followed the rules no one said out loud. For a while, that was enough. Until one afternoon, Rachel stood in my doorway, arms crossed lightly, her voice calm, like she was discussing furniture, not my life. "Olivia needs more space," she said, glancing past me at the walls, the desk, the bed. "It just makes sense." I didn't argue. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. They chose her. By that evening, my things were in boxes. My clothes folded too neatly, my books stacked like they didn't belong anywhere. Olivia stood in the hallway, watching, her expression unreadable, already imagining the room as hers. My dad didn't look at me. He stood near the stairs, one hand in his pocket, saying nothing. That silence told me everything. I carried the last box down the narrow steps into the garage. The air changed immediately. Cooler, heavier. The concrete floor held the chill even in summer. A single overhead bulb flickered when I pulled the string. Rachel had set up a folding cot against the wall, a thin blanket folded at the edge like it was temporary. "This will be fine for now," she said. I nodded. I understood. That was the moment. The door to the house closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time I realized something simple and irreversible. I didn't have a room anymore. I had a place to sleep, and those two things are not the same. The first night in the garage, I did not sleep. Not really. I lay on that folding cot, staring at the ceiling beams, counting the faint cracks in the wood, listening to the house breathe on the other side of the door. The heater inside clicked on and off every few minutes, but none of that warmth reached me. Out here, the air stayed still, cold. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders, but it never quite helped. By morning, my back ached from the metal bars beneath the mattress, and my hands felt stiff from the temperature drop overnight. I said nothing. The routine changed quickly after that. I woke up earlier than everyone else because the garage door would rattle loudly if I opened it after sunrise. I learned how to move quietly, how to step around the loose boards without making noise, how to keep my things contained to one corner, so I would not be told I was taking up too much space. Inside the house, nothing felt like mine anymore. My old room had already changed. New curtains, new bedding, Olivia's clothes hanging where mine used to be. I saw it once when the door was left open. That was enough. I stopped looking. Breakfast became a silent ritual. Rachel would place plates on the table, always one short of what felt natural, as if I were optional. Olivia talked about school, about friends, about things that seemed to matter. My dad nodded along, offering small comments, never once glancing in my direction. When I reached for a glass, I noticed it had been moved to a lower cabinet separate from the rest. Small changes, quiet ones, but they added up. They always do. After school, I did not go straight home anymore. I stayed late in the library, sitting at a corner table near the window, where the light lasted longest. Homework took longer than it needed to, not because it was difficult, but because I had nowhere else to be. Sometimes I watched other students get picked up, parents waiting in warm cars' engines, running doors opening before their kids even reached the curb. I stayed until the lights flickered overhead, and the librarian made her final round. Then I walked home. The driveway always looked the same. 2 cars parked neatly, the garage door closed. Everything in its place. I would stand there for a second, just long enough to feel it, then pull the side door open and step back into the space that was now mine. The smell of oil, the faint hum of the refrigerator unit in the corner, the quiet. It became familiar, too familiar. One night, the temperature dropped below freezing. I could see my breath when I exhaled. I wrapped myself in an extra jacket, pulled my knees closer to my chest, and stared at the thin line of light coming from under the door that led back into the house. I could hear laughter inside. Olivia's voice. Rachel's lighter tone. My dad saying something I could not make out. I listened for a moment. Then I turned away. That was when something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small, steady realization settling into place. I was not waiting for things to change anymore. I was counting how long it would take before I could leave. Time started to move differently after that winter. Not faster, just more deliberate. I stopped measuring days by what happened in that house and started measuring them by what I could control. Hours at the library turned into routines. I picked the same seat every afternoon, third table from the window, where the sunlight lasted until almost 5 in the winter and nearly 7 in the spring. I finished assignments early, then stayed anyway, reading things that were not assigned. Learning things no one had asked me to learn. It felt like building something no one could take away. At school, I kept my head down. Good grades were not about pride anymore. They were leverage. Every test, every paper, every extra credit assignment was another step toward leaving. I did not talk about college at home. There was no point. The one time I mentioned applications, Rachel smiled politely and said, "We will see what is realistic." I understood what that meant. Olivia talked about campus tours, out-of-state options, dorm layouts, meal plans. My dad listened carefully, asking questions, offering suggestions. I listened too, not to join the conversation, but to understand the system. Money, deadlines, decisions. I learned quietly. I got a part-time job at a grocery store 2 miles away. Evening shifts 4 hours at a time, stocking shelves, scanning items, counting change. It was not much, but it was mine. I opened my own bank account the week I turned 17. I remember holding the debit card in my hand, turning it over once then, putting it carefully into my wallet like it mattered. Because it did. Every dollar had a purpose. Bus fare. Application fees. A used laptop that did not freeze every 10 minutes. I kept receipts in a small envelope under my cot, organized by date like proof that I existed outside that house. Nights in the garage did not change much, but I did. The cold still came. The thin blanket was still not enough. The light still leaked under the door from the house I no longer belonged to, but I stopped looking at it. Instead, I looked at my phone's screen, tracking deadlines, checking email, waiting for responses that could change everything. One afternoon, sitting in that same library seat, I opened an email that made my hands go still. Acceptance. Not just 1, 3. 1 with partial scholarship, 1 with work study. 1 that felt just out of reach but possible. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading the words over and over like they might disappear. I did not tell anyone that night. Not Rachel, not Olivia, not even my dad. I folded the printed letters carefully and placed them in the same envelope as my receipts. Then I went back to the garage, sat on the edge of the cot, and let the silence settle around me. That was the moment something shifted again. Not hope, not exactly. Something quieter, more certain. I was not just planning to leave anymore. I had options, and for the first time in a long time, the timeline was not something I had to endure. It was something I could choose. The decision did not happen in a dramatic way. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because the grocery store had a shipment that day, and my shift ran an hour longer than usual. I walked home under the streetlights, the air still holding the last bit of winter, my backpack heavier than it needed to be. Inside it were the acceptance letters, the receipts, the small envelope that had quietly become my entire plan. When I stepped into the garage, nothing had changed. The same cot, the same concrete floor, the same faint smell of oil. But I was different. I set my bag down, pulled out the envelope, and laid everything on the thin blanket like pieces of something finally complete. 3 schools, 3 paths, all real. I sat there for a long time, not thinking about what I was leaving, but about what I was stepping into. That night, I packed. Not dramatically, not all at once, just the things that mattered. Clothes that fit into one duffel bag, my laptop, the envelope. A pair of worn sneakers I had used for every shift and every walk home. I left behind everything else. By morning, the garage looked the same as it always had. No one noticed anything different at breakfast. Rachel poured coffee. Olivia talked about an upcoming trip, something about visiting a campus out west. My dad nodded, asking about flights and hotels. I sat at the end of the table, finishing my toast in silence. No one asked where I was going. No one asked what I had decided. That silence made it easier. I stood up, placed my plate in the sink, and picked up my bag. Rachel glanced at me briefly. "You have work today?" she asked. I shook my head. No, that was all. I walked past the living room, past the hallway that used to lead to my room, and reached the front door. For a second, I paused. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember the feeling, the weight of it, the clarity. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different. Not warmer, just open. I did not look back. I took a bus across town to a small apartment I had found through a listing pinned on a bulletin board at the grocery store. 1 bedroom shared with a nursing student who worked night shifts and barely spoke. Rent was $800 a month, utilities included. It was not much, but it was mine. The first night there, I sat on the edge of a real bed in a real room with a door that closed fully and stayed closed. No flickering light. No cold air creeping in from beneath a door. Just quiet. I placed the envelope on the desk, lined up the letters again, and made my choice. The school with the scholarship. The one that meant I could survive without asking for anything from anyone. I filled out the final forms that night, submitted everything before I could second guess it. Then I sat back and looked around the room. Plain walls, a small window, a desk with 1 chair. It was simple. It was enough. I understood something in that moment that I had not allowed myself to say out loud before. I was not leaving that house behind. I had already been gone for a long time. This was just the first time it became official. The first semester felt like stepping into a different version of reality, one where every decision had a consequence that belonged to me and no one else. I woke up in a room that stayed warm through the night, where the only sound was the soft hum of the heater and the occasional car passing outside the window. No footsteps above me, no voices through a thin door. Just quiet that felt earned. I worked mornings at a campus coffee shop, opening at 5:30, measuring out grounds. Steaming milk, learning the rhythm of people who had places to be and plans already in motion. Between classes, I studied in empty lecture halls, the kind with rows of seats that echoed when you walked through them alone. I chose a major that made sense, something practical, something that built toward stability. Finance. Numbers were clear. They followed rules. They did not change depending on who you were or where you stood in a room. At night, I returned to that small apartment, sat at the desk and tracked everything. Income, expenses, tuition, rent. Every dollar had a direction. Every hour had a purpose. I did not think about home. Not the house on Maple Ridge Drive. Not the garage. Not the thin blanket or the cold concrete. I had trained myself to move forward without looking back. For a while, that worked. Then one afternoon during my second year, my phone buzzed with a number I had not seen in over a year. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Emily, my dad said, his voice sounding older, less certain than I remembered. There was a pause, like he was waiting for something I was not going to give him. "We need to talk." I did not respond right away. I just listened. "There are some things with the house," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Paperwork, taxes. It is complicated." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheet open on my laptop, rows of numbers that made more sense than anything he was saying. "What do you need?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "We might need your help," he said finally. "Not we want to see you, not how have you been." Just that. I understood. Some things do not change. I wrote down the address he gave me for a meeting with a lawyer, a date and time set for the following week. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, the pen still in my hand, the ink pressing lightly into the paper. The house. After all this time, it came back to that. I did not feel anger, not even curiosity, just a quiet awareness that something unfinished was about to surface. I closed my laptop, folded the piece of paper once, and placed it into the same envelope I had carried with me since the garage. Then I stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed to my evening shift. Some things required emotion. This was not one of them. This was something else entirely. This was structure. And for the first time, I had learned how to read it. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I do not like walking into situations unprepared. The office sat on the third floor of a narrow brick building downtown, the kind with frosted glass doors and quiet hallways that carried every sound just a little too far. The name on the door was simple: Carter and Ellis Legal Group. I paused for a second before stepping inside, not to gather courage, but to adjust my expectations. Some places change you, others reveal you. This one felt like it would do both. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her expression polite but neutral, like she had seen every version of this moment before. "Emily Carter?" she asked. I nodded. She gestured toward a row of chairs along the wall. "They are expecting you." I sat down, placing my bag neatly at my feet, my hands resting lightly on my knees. Across the room I saw them. Rachel, Olivia, my dad. They were already seated at a long conference table behind a glass partition, their voices low, their posture tight. Rachel was speaking, her hands moving in small, controlled gestures, the way she always did when she wanted to appear composed. Olivia sat beside her, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up with a look that suggested mild inconvenience more than concern. My dad sat at the end, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on a stack of papers in front of him. He looked older, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. None of them saw me yet. I observed them for a moment the same way I had learned to observe everything else. Patterns, tension, gaps. Then the door opened and a man stepped out, mid-40s, navy suit, glasses that reflected the overhead lights just enough to obscure his eyes for a second. "Emily," he said. I stood. "Yes." He nodded once, then stepped aside to let me in. The room fell quiet the moment I entered. Rachel turned first. Her expression shifted quickly, surprise, smoothing into something more controlled. Olivia followed her gaze, narrowing slightly, as if trying to place me into a version of the past that no longer fit. My dad looked up last. For a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe regret, then it was gone. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, setting my bag beside the chair, folding my hands in front of me. No one spoke right away. The lawyer closed the door behind me and moved to the head of the table, arranging the documents with precise movements. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his tone measured, professional, detached in the way that made everything feel more serious. "We are here to review the ownership structure of the property on Maple Ridge Drive." The words landed cleanly. Ownership, structure, property, not family, not home. I felt something settle into place. This was not about the past. This was about documentation. Rachel leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but edged. "We just need to finalize the transfer," she said, glancing briefly in my direction, as if I were a formality, not a factor. "There should not be any complications." The lawyer did not respond immediately. Instead, he opened the folder in front of him and turned it toward the table. Pages, signatures, dates. I recognized the layout instantly. I had seen versions of the structure before in my classes. Custodial accounts, trust arrangements, conditional ownership. My eyes moved across the paper, reading faster than anyone expected. Line by line, clause by clause. And then I saw it, a name, mine, not as a witness, not as a secondary party, primary beneficiary. The room stayed silent, but something had already shifted. I did not react. I did not look up. I simply kept reading, letting the information settle, precise and undeniable. That was the moment I understood. This was never their house, not in the way they believed. And for the first time, I realized why my dad had sounded uncertain on the phone. He already knew something was wrong. He just did not know how much. The lawyer let the silence sit for a moment longer than necessary, the kind of pause that forces everyone in the room to feel the weight of what is about to be said. Then he looked directly at my father. "Mr. Carter, I want to clarify something before we proceed," he said, his tone still controlled. "The property on Maple Ridge Drive was not transferred in the way you believed." Rachel shifted in her seat immediately, her posture tightening. "What does that mean?" she asked. Her voice still calm but thinner now. The lawyer turned another page, sliding a document forward with 2 fingers. 5 years ago, when the property was refinanced, it was placed under a custodial structure with a designated beneficiary, he explained. That beneficiary is Emily. He did not raise his voice. He did not emphasize the name. He did not need to. Rachel blinked once, then again, as if the words had not landed properly. "That does not make any sense," she said, a controlled shake of her head. "We have been living there. We have been paying for everything. Occupancy and payment do not override ownership," the lawyer replied. "The structure was set up in a way that delays full control until the beneficiary reaches legal age and elects to assume it." Olivia finally looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from disinterest to confusion. "Wait, so what does that actually mean?" she asked, her voice sharper now. The lawyer folded his hands on the table. "It means the property legally belongs to Emily." The room went still. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, complete stop. My father exhaled slowly, his eyes dropping to the table, then back to the documents, as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something else. I thought, he began, then stopped. Rachel leaned forward, her composure cracking just slightly at the edges. "There has to be a mistake," she said, her voice tightening. "We were told the house was transferred to Mark, that everything was handled." The lawyer nodded once. "It was handled," he said, "but not in the way you assumed. The original terms were established years earlier, and they were never altered." I said nothing. I did not need to. The information was already doing the work. Olivia looked between her mother and the lawyer, her expression shifting into something closer to unease. "So what happens now?" she asked. The lawyer turned slightly in his chair, his attention moving from them to me for the first time in a direct, unmistakable way. "That depends on Emily," he said. Rachel followed his gaze, her eyes landing on me fully now, really looking for the first time since I walked into the room. There was something different in her expression. Not control, not certainty, something else, something uncertain. "Emily," she said, my name sounding unfamiliar in her voice. "We can talk about this. There are ways to work this out." I met her gaze, calm, steady, the same way I had learned to face everything else. I did not feel anger. I did not feel satisfaction. Just clarity. "We are talking," I said quietly. And for the first time since I had entered that room, everyone understood exactly who was in control. No one spoke immediately after that. The air in the room shifted, not dramatically, but enough that every small movement suddenly felt louder. Rachel leaned back slightly, her fingers pressing together as if she were recalibrating, searching for a version of control that no longer existed. Olivia looked at her, waiting for direction that did not come. My dad remained still, his eyes fixed on the documents in front of him, as if reading them again might change what they meant. It would not. The lawyer cleared his throat, gently bringing the focus back to structure, to process, to what came next. At this point, he said, "The beneficiary has the authority to assume full ownership, initiate transfer of occupancy terms, or restructure the property agreement." His words were precise, measured, final. Rachel nodded slowly, her expression smoothing into something practiced again, but thinner now, less certain. "Emily," she said, her tone softer, almost careful. "We all want what is best here. This is still your home, your family." I held her gaze for a second, long enough to let the words settle between us. Then I looked down at the document again, tracing the lines with my eyes, not because I needed to read them, but because I understood them. It was never treated that way, I said calmly. No accusation, no raised voice, just a statement. Olivia shifted in her seat, her discomfort visible now, her earlier confidence gone. So, what are you saying? She asked, her voice tighter than before. Are you just going to take it? I considered that question for a moment, not because I needed time to decide, but because I wanted to answer it correctly. No, I said. I am going to formalize what already exists. The lawyer gave a small nod as if confirming the language. Rachel exhaled slowly, her composure slipping again at the edges. There has to be a middle ground, she said. We have been living there, maintaining it, investing in it. I met her eyes again, and I have been building my life without it, I replied. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not uncertain, settled. My dad finally spoke, his voice lower than before. Emily, he said, and for a second it sounded like something else might follow. An apology, an explanation, something, but it did not. He stopped there. That was all. I understood. Some things arrived too late to matter. The lawyer turned another page, sliding a new set of documents toward me. If you are ready, he said, we can proceed with the formal transfer and occupancy notice. I picked up the pen without hesitation. The weight of it felt familiar in my hand, like every form I had, filled out every decision I had made on my own. I signed once, then again, each line clean, deliberate, final. When I placed the pen down, the room felt smaller, somehow like the space itself had shifted to match the new reality. Rachel said nothing. Olivia looked away. My dad nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I gathered my bag, stood up, and adjusted the strap over my shoulder. You will receive the formal notice within the week, the lawyer said, addressing them now. I paused at the door, my hand resting lightly on the handle. For a second, I looked back at the table, at the people who had once decided where I belonged. Then I opened the door and stepped out. This time there was no hesitation, no pause, just forward movement. Exactly as it should be. The notice was delivered exactly 7 days later. Certified mail, signature required. I was there when it arrived, standing just inside the front door as the mail carrier handed over the envelope with a polite nod, unaware of what it contained or what it meant. The house looked the same as it always had from the outside. White siding, narrow driveway, 2 cars parked neatly, everything in place. But inside, the balance had already shifted. I stepped into the hallway slowly, taking in the details I had not seen in years. The walls had been repainted, the flooring replaced. Small upgrades that suggested time had moved forward without me. That was fine. I had moved forward too. Rachel was the first to see me. She froze for a fraction of a second, her posture stiffening before she forced a small, controlled smile. You came, she said, her voice measured. I nodded once. I said I would. Olivia stood near the stairs, arms crossed lightly, watching me with a look that was no longer confident, just uncertain. My dad stood in the doorway of the living room, his expression unreadable, as if he had already accepted something he could not change. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, the same table where I used to sit quietly at the edge, invisible. This is the formal notice, I said, my voice calm, steady. Rachel did not touch it immediately. Emily, we should talk about this, she said, her tone softer now, almost careful. We are talking, I replied. That was enough. She opened the envelope slowly, her hands no longer as controlled as before. Page by page, her expression shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Olivia leaned closer, reading over her shoulder, her face tightening as the words settled in. My dad did not move. He did not need to. He already knew. You are giving us 30 days, Rachel said finally, her voice thinner than before. That is correct, I said. No apology. No hesitation. Just structure. Just terms. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was final. I walked past them down the hallway and stopped in front of a door I had not opened in years. Olivia's room. My old room. I pushed it open slowly. The space looked different, but not completely. Same window, same angle of light, same corner where my desk used to sit. I stepped inside, letting the silence settle around me. For a moment, I saw both versions at once. What it was, what it became. What it is now. I turned back toward the hallway where they all stood, watching, waiting, uncertain. I will be back in 30 days, I said. To take possession. The words landed clean. Final. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I walked past them through the living room, out the front door, and onto the same lawn where everything had started. The air felt the same. Open. Clear. I paused for a second, just long enough to let the moment settle, then continued forward. Some people call it revenge. Some call it justice. I call it alignment. If you have ever been treated like you did not belong in your own home, comment number 1. If you have heard a story like this from someone else, comment number 2. And if you never want to be in a situation like this, comment number 3, or share your thoughts. Because sometimes the place that pushed you out is the very place that proves who you became. And this time, I did not just walk away, I walked back with ownership.